Just want to welcome you all here tonight. I'm Bart Loser. I am the coordinator of our continuing education program here at Toastmasters District 55. You can find us on tmd55.org under the CE program or continuing education. We also have most of our recordings are being put into a resource library, which can be found on there as well, so that you can see many of these shows, even when they're not live, you can see them stored and watch them at your convenience. Chuck and I met probably about 6 or 8 months ago, as he suggested he wanted to do some seminars on evaluation, as well as how to produce highly effective and impactful PowerPoint programs or slideshows. And he taught that show, and I have seen many programs on that, and I was just blown away by how much I learned and how entertained I was, and I use it today in creating all of my PowerPoint slides. Chuck came to me recently and said he was interested in doing this particular program because we are going into contest season, or we're well into it at this time, and having judges really learn how to fine-tune their art of judging accurately according to how they're prescribed on the judges' forms, the criteria, using that criteria well. And so we have Chuck here. Chuck he was a trainer for Shell Oil in Houston for almost 40 years or over 40 years, and he's been a Toastmaster for almost as long as well. So I want to welcome Chuck Hinkle. I'm very excited to have you here, very excited to have this program. Please welcome Chuck Hinkle.
Thank you very much, Bart. Let me share my screen now. And do you see the slide?
Not yet.
Not yet.
There
How
we
about
go.
now?
We can.
Great. So I think we all know about the value of speaking in contests, and we talk about why people want to do contests and what you get out of it, lots of benefits. But what happens if at some time the worst thing happens, or maybe not the worst thing, but hard to imagine, but it is possible. You may not be first and you may not get to move on. What then? Well, congratulations, you get to be a judge. To be eligible to be a judge doesn't take a whole lot. You have to be, so for a club contest, you have to be a paid member of the club. For an area, division, or district contest, you have to be a paid member for a minimum of 6 months. You have to have completed a minimum of 6 speech projects in the competent communicator, or a minimum of, well, I've got that covered, 2 levels in pathways. And I thought this was an obvious one. To be eligible, you have to be physically present at the contest. Now that was written before we started doing virtual contests, so I'm going to assume that it means virtually present as well as physically present. But the main thing you have to realize as you start becoming a judge or interested in being a judge, it does take a very different mindset. And that's what I also want to explore this evening, is talk about that different mindset, how to be an effective judge. My agenda is going to be as such. Want to start out very quickly, the purpose of judging. I'm going to be talking about the responsibilities of different levels of judges, different people who have judging roles in contests. I like to talk about the myths and pitfalls of judging. I see that as kind of the centerpiece of this presentation. We'll talk about the details behind the ballot, so we're familiar with the ballot, at least the international speech ballot. Talk about judging, chief judge responsibilities, and then I've got some special directions to point out, and then a couple things to wrap up, and we can do Q&A at the end also. Or we can do Q&A as we go along if you have something that you just can't wait. But there's a big difference between evaluation and judging. The purpose of evaluation is we want the speaker to improve, and it's up to us to help that speaker improve. Usually we're going to compare the speech that's being given against the objectives of the speech. We know if this is whatever the speech is, it has certain objectives. How well does the speaker meet those objectives? That's what we care about. The purpose of judging, on the other hand, is very different. We want to determine who's the best. We're no longer comparing the speech against the objectives, but we're not also planning to compare it against each other. And that might be a surprise to you. What we're going to do to be an effective judge is compare the speech against the standard. So we'll be talking about that as we go along. Let's talk about the responsibility of contest judges. The responsibilities are you have to know how to fill out the ballot and you have to select winners. And then the responsibilities of tiebreaker judges, similar, you have to know how to fill out the tiebreaker ballot. You have to select winners, and then you have to seal your ballot and hand it directly to the chief judge. And I'll talk more about that when we talk about the responsibilities of the chief judge. So those, the tiebreaker and the regular contest judge, have a lot in common there. But I want to talk about myths and pitfalls to avoid, and especially jump into this topic. But there are a whole bunch of myths or pitfalls that we as judges want to be aware of so that we can work around. First is that, oh, it's the best position to be a speaker in a contest is either first, or some people say it's last, but usually a lot of people have a preference and they have their opinion that either speaking first or last gives you a huge advantage. As a judge, we want to overcome that. Their feeling is that, well, if you're first, you're setting that high mark and then no one can score higher. If you do a great job, they're going to give you all 10s, and the best someone else can do then is get a 10 also. Plus, judges get tired as they hear more and more speeches. They may pay less attention to the later ones. Therefore, it must be wonderful to go first or second or early in the presentation. On the other hand, the flip side, some people are convinced it's best to be last because judges start to forget the earlier speeches. They fade in our memory, and they tend to rate higher the speeches that they remember, which are going to be the most recent ones. I'm going to be giving you, when we talk about the ballot, some tips and techniques that help us overcome this myth, these myths. Second pitfall that we want to overcome is help the underdog. We had a man in a club I was in, and he was a member for a long time. His name was Jim Carson. He came every week practically. He was very clever. He also had a bad stutter. He had an interesting personality, but he would every now and then compete in a speech contest. And you could hear some judges, club members say sometimes, you know, he's tried this so many times, he's never won the contest, and they start feeling some pity for him because he's definitely the underdog. And one of the pitfalls as a judge we want to not fall into is being swayed by that and thinking, well, poor Jim, he's really got a lot of adversity here. I want to give him some help. I'm going to boost his score to help him out here. That's one of the things we want to avoid. The next benefit or next pitfall that we want to avoid is almost the opposite. It's the halo effect. So I've had a woman in several of my clubs, Yolanda Bynum. She's represented our district at the international speech contest and been a finalist at least twice, maybe 3 times. She is one of my favorite speakers to listen to. And it's easy as a judge. You see Yolanda on the program and I get excited. I can hardly wait to hear her give a speech. And as a judge, we have to neutralize that. And again, I'm going to show you the techniques to help us ignore the halo effect. Don't let us fall into that pitfall, recognizing, oh, this person's always great. They're going to do such a terrific job. I know I can give them high scores, make them earn it. There's also the reverse halo effect. And maybe you see a speaker and you're pretty impressed with them, but you're thinking, Richard, it was a good speech, but I score him the highest, but I know that he can't compete at the next level. Here's Yolanda. Yolanda, she had an off night. And by the time we get to the next level, I know she'll turn it around. She'll polish the speech. I'm going to give her the benefit and rate her first, even though at this point for this contest, someone else may have earned it. We want to ignore and avoid the reverse halo effect that they can't compete at the next level. So I'm going to mark them down. Another pitfall to avoid is I'm going to give someone else a chance. I'm looking at this list of contestants, and I've listened to them all, and there's 5 of them, 4 of them, or all 5 have done wonderful. They're very close. I could choose either or any of the 5 and feel that I'm promoting a good candidate, but I see these 4, they've already competed at the next level. Here's Jim over here who's never competed at the next level. He did a great job tonight. I'm going to choose him just because everyone else has already won this contest. And I want someone new to go and represent us at the next level. That's another one of the pitfalls we want to avoid. Another one to avoid is the second time around. And I've seen this one in action, where after a speech, everyone's convinced this guy should have won. Next year comes along, he does another speech, and maybe it's not quite the best, but as a judge, you may be remembering how he did last year and feel, well, he was cheated last year. I think I'm going to make it up to him and make it up. I'm going to give him a few extra points and let him get flipped with the person I would have put first otherwise. So these are all things that are temptations that, as a judge with integrity, I don't want to fall into these pitfalls. I also have to be careful of prejudices and biases that I might have, either against the topic or against the person. There may be some topic someone chooses to speak on that I personally disagree with. I'm not going to count that against the person. I am for their organization or for their content or their delivery, just because of the topics. Likewise, they may be speaking and promoting something that I think is wonderful and should be promoted more, and I'd like more people to hear it at the next level, but that is also a bias, and I want to avoid that. And the same thing, not just topics, but people. There's certain people that I might have more affinity towards. I don't want to give them extra points or recognition on my ballot. So these are a couple more pitfalls that I want to avoid as a judge with integrity. That would be prejudices and biases. One that's maybe a little harder to avoid is what I call judging fatigue. This I can see maybe especially at the international level, where you have a lot of contestants. It's easy to start losing attention, maybe feeling that you're getting a bit tired and you're not paying as well, you're not giving as much attention to later contestants as you did to the first set of speakers. Again, I'm going to show you a technique that will help us avoid having judging fatigue, but it's up to us to stay alert and give the same degree of attention to each of the speakers in the contest. The technique begins by having kind of a middle line or a standard in our head. I said that we're not comparing speakers to each other. I want us to think about, what would I consider the middle or a standard? What is average? I'm going to compare each speaker to what I consider ahead of time, what would be the average speaker. There's a danger at starting at perfect and marking down. We like to do that. Well, we do that with tests. You have 100, and as you start missing problems, okay, now you've got a 97, now you've got a 94 and a 91, and you missed another one. So your score goes down as I see errors. We don't do that as a judge, though. As a judge, I like to start about 50. I do start at 50. And then as I see people do something above average, I raise it. Or if I see someone do something I feel is below average, I lower it. If we started like the test and I started assigning 10 because I didn't see anything wrong with this speaker, then there's no room to improve for speakers on down the line. And we start to run into that myth that, yeah, it's best to be first because I can nail all the top scores and there's no room for someone else to be more. That leads me to want to talk about the ballot. We have to become familiar with it, and we'll review the terminology later. I want to begin by talking about the structure, the format of the ballot. I tell you, this is not designed to help you as a judge. I'm going to give you some recommendations to assist you to be an effective judge, and it means marking up the ballot and making it more the way that it should be. If I had the rules of and the authority to change all the ballots in international. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore the labels. They are really not good labels. Excellent, very good, good, and fair. I want to consider average. Does it meet the requirements? Or does it exceed the requirements? Or does it fail to meet the requirements? And if it's not average, then by how much does it exceed or be deficient? I mark out the suggested scores next. I replace it with an average score. So I see that there's 20 points for speech development. I know that average is 10. Effectiveness, my average is going to be 7. So if I am filling out the ballot and I hear someone and their effectiveness, I think average speaker does about as well as you did, or you did about as well as an average speaker. You get 7 points from me. And I will tell you in my experience that club contests can often be won by about 55 or more points on a ballot. When I get to the area level, the winners usually will be in 60 or more points. Division contest winners, 70 or more points. And district contest winners usually have at least 75 points. Now, that's not to say I've had people in the 90s. It's extraordinary. Those are my favorite speeches, as they should be. But my typical speech, at least at the club level, is going to hover in the 40 to 60 range. Next thing in your ballot, as soon as you get the order of contestants at the start of the contest, put the names on the form. I want you to fill them out right to left. I'll show you why. As a speaker is filled, I'm going to fill out the scores for each section for that first speaker. Don't total it yet, though. I don't want you thinking in your head what the total is. Instead, fold over the column after you've filled out all the numbers so you can't see it anymore. That way, when you are now thinking of speaker number 2, you're not thinking about how do they compare with speaker 1. You're thinking about that standard that you have. How well do they compete against the standard? I'm ignoring, I'm forgetting, neglecting everybody who's already spoken. It doesn't matter at this point. I want to know how well does this person do against the average. Finally, after all the speakers are finished, that's when I'll add up the totals. And hopefully I don't have a tie. If there's a tie, then I have to come up with some decision to promote one over the other. But this is where I now can add up the totals. I list the top 3 speakers in order. You must have 3 names if there are at least 3 speakers. I've been involved in a situation where there were 3 speakers. Someone listed 2 on their ballot. Maybe they wanted to disqualify the third, or they thought it was obvious, but we had to reject that ballot because if there are at least 3 speakers, you must list 3 speakers on your ballot. And then sign the ballot, write your name. And this is sad, at the district level, I've been the chief counter and I've had to throw away ballots that the judge never signed and then hand it to one of the ballot counters. How would I design it if I got to design a better form? Actually, I have designed it. We've used it for a while, but I would show the suggested point values with better titles, and I would list the names right to left. But since I don't have that authority, really, especially anymore, I just kind of mark up my own ballot to simulate this, and it will make you a more effective judge. Tiebreaker ballots are different. They give an order for all the speakers, not just the first 3. So you must fill out all of the speakers on the tiebreaker ballot, and then you'll seal and hand that ballot only to the chief judge, not to any of the other ballot counters. It has to be hand delivered to the chief judge. And since the chief judge knows who you are, the chief judge will come over and take the ballot, your special ballot, directly from you. Why do I care about the ballot anyway? I've had a judge I know, or a friend, who was judging, and he says, it's the humorous contest. I'm just going to vote for whoever I think is the funniest speaker. But TI has made this rubric They've said, well, for the international speech, content is only 50% because there's other elements that we think are critical and should be considered in having the best speech. Part of it is delivery. That's 30%. And the language that you use, which you might overlook otherwise, that's 20% of the ballot. Let's talk about some of the terminology and what these different categories mean. So content, speech development. This would be how well is your speech organized? Does it have an introduction, a body, a conclusion that's centered around a purpose? Are the introduction and conclusion effective? Maybe they had one, but you go, yeah, it didn't accomplish what it needed to do. Does the material support the purpose? So be thinking in your head ahead of time, the perfect introduction, body, conclusion, purpose, support material, as opposed to not good enough. And when you think about that spectrum, where on it does this particular speech fall? Content effectiveness. This is 15% of the ballot, partly influenced by audience reaction, but mostly this should be your judgment. Could you figure out what the purpose of the speech was? Did the speaker hold your interest? Was the speech appropriate for this audience? Toastmasters has a guide, and I don't remember at the moment, I don't think it's listed as a rule, but it is a guide that says we are presenting to a family audience. If something's too raunchy, it should, well, we can, I have seen speeches I consider too raunchy. I'll give it a very low score in this area, usually low enough that even if it were excellent in all the other areas, it's going to drop below another very good speech. Speech value, now we're still under content. Did the speaker have something meaningful or original to say? Was it worth your time listening to this speech? Or I say sometimes, would you be willing to listen to it again? Did the speaker contribute to your thinking? Are the ideas behind the speech important? All of these things contribute to these 15 points that are available. Talk about delivery. There's a physical delivery. Did the speaker's appearance reinforce the speech? That might be body language, might be movement, can be gestures, it could be the way they position their body. All these things can enhance a speech. These are all things that we can be thinking about that make a speech more excellent or less effective. Delivery, the voice. Does the speaker's voice enhance the speech? So consider the variety of the pitch, the rate, the volume. Could you understand the words that were being said? The manner of the delivery. Was it presented with some confidence and with some enthusiasm? And then the language appropriateness. This isn't just what was his vocabulary like? Did he use bad words? No, it's did the choice of words enhance the understanding of the speech? Did it improve the mood? Did it help the visualization? I've heard some speeches where the adjectives were so wonderful and precise and graphic. I could see it even without closing my eyes. I could see what they were describing. So we're looking for metaphors and similes and adjectives. But also when I say appropriateness, are they avoiding jargon or technical terms that a standard audience might not understand? I'm looking for the language that is appropriate for this audience. And then language correctness. So this is going to be, did they have proper grammar? Did they have proper pronunciation? What's missing? You might think, there are some things I think you should be considering that are missing. The first is the time. What happens if I'm watching this speech and they've gone way over, and I can tell they're way over? I'm not going to put them on my ballot in one of the first 3 spaces, am I? Yes, you will if you consider them in your point structure that they met, because timing is for timers. It's not for judges. We are oblivious of the time. And if someone spends 9 minutes, but they were excellent in every way, I'm going to put them first. I leave it to the chief judge. That's his job to take the timing report and then strike off any person who's been disqualified for time. And the second is for originality. You might ask, what happens if you don't think it's original? It doesn't go into your scoring, but you do have to consider originality in a different manner, because there is a requirement for the speaker that the speech has to be original. I know of 2 contests I've been at. One I was a judge at, another one, a friend of mine was competing against the speaker, but we heard speeches that we recognized. He had heard when he did it, he was a humorous speech contest. He competed against someone who did Andy Griffith once did a humorous speech or talk about football as seen by someone who'd never seen a football game. This man did hockey from someone who's never seen a hockey game, and a lot of the adjectives and examples were the same. So he felt and lodged a complaint that this wasn't original. I was a judge once and I heard a tall tale, and I'm not sure where I'd heard it, but I knew it. It wasn't from Toastmasters, but I'd heard that tall tale before. And as I turned in the ballot, I told Aileen Haynes, who was the chief judge, Aileen, I'm sorry to do this to you. I've heard this speech, this tall tale before. It's not original. And then when we talk about the chief judge, we'll talk about how that gets settled. Let's talk about the responsibilities of the chief judge. Your job is to distribute the forms ahead of time. You're going to brief the judges and the staff. You're going to appoint the tiebreaker judge, who does not attend the judge briefing because that tiebreaker judge is supposed to be a secret. You collect the timer results. You collect that tie-breaking ballot. You are the chief counter, and then you provide the report to the contest chair of the results. And you must be very clear about the order of the finishers. Put specifically first, second, third, and label them. I was in a speech contest. I was the humorous contestant at the area level, and the judge gave the Toastmaster or the area governor, I forget which, the list of the winners and put third, second, first, expecting the person to read them off in that order. Well, the person read the bottom one as third, read the second one as second, and then said that I'd won the contest. Judge was very embarrassed, but had to get up and say, no, this is backwards. I didn't win. Flip the results. And then we redid the presentation of the awards. So avoid that problem, that embarrassment if you're the chief judge. Make sure that it's very specific to the Toastmaster what the order of the winners is. For the briefing, that's where contestants will draw for order. What if a contestant's late? You can have someone draw for that contestant. That contestant can arrive to the point where the contest chair is introduced. Once the chair is introduced, that candidate or that contestant no longer can compete. If there's a alternate, that person can be attending the briefing, and that person will fill in if the contest chair is introduced and the real contestant who was supposed to represent that area or whatever hasn't arrived yet. If they come before the contest chair is introduced, they can fill in and take the spot that was drawn for them. There are some special directions to be aware of. One is that everything is final at the end of the contest. Once the gavel hits and says the contest is closed, everything is frozen. So back to the example I had where they announced me as being the winner. If the judge was out of the room or not paying attention or whatever, and the contest had ended, doesn't matter now if the judge says, wait, he's not supposed to be the winner. John over here was the real winner. Does not matter. Once the contest closes, everything that's been announced is finished. You cannot go back and change it. Let's say you have a tie. How do you handle the tie-breaking ballot? The only time that you will use that tie-breaking ballot is if there's a tie, not just for first, maybe it's for third. You have 2 people tied for third. What you'll do is open the ballot only at that point. You don't open it unless there's a tie, and you will find those 2 names of the people who were tied. Which of those people did the tiebreaker judge list higher. Tiebreaker judge may have had those two 7th and 8th. Doesn't matter. Whoever was higher between those two gets that position that they were tied for. And it's possible you might have people tied 1st and 2nd. Okay, for 1st. So now you're going to use the tiebreaker ballot and you see who's 1st or higher on that ballot. That's who gets 1st. 2nd place is the person who was tied for them. You may now have a tie for 3rd and 4th also. Okay, back to the tiebreaker ballot. Look for those two people. Which one of them was higher rated? That person is 3rd. You need to destroy the ballots after the contest, preferably not on site. You don't want someone digging around through the trash, maybe even accident, and find all these ballots that were there. So that's something for you to dispose of once you get home. If there's a protest, maybe it is originality, only contestants and judges can make a protest. Just someone watching the presentation, the contest, doesn't have the authority to lodge a protest. It's only from judges and from other contestants. Now, if I'm not a judge, but I recognize something, and I know one of the speakers, I might tell that judge, and then the judges or the speaker, and then they're going to have to decide whether or not they think I'm credible or not. But only the judge and the contestant can make the claim and tell the chief judge. If there is a protest, as the chief judge, you have to notify the speaker that a protest has been made. The speaker has the opportunity to defend himself. And then the judges will go ahead and vote privately whether or not that speaker is disqualified or not. So they get to judge. The judges are going to decide whether it's going to be whether they're going to disqualify the person or not. And you will tell the speaker the results. You won't tell them what the score was, what the vote was, or who voted which way, but you will tell them what the results are. But no announcement is going to be made that someone's been disqualified for originality. That was for originality. If someone's disqualified for time, you need to notify the Toastmaster, because before that person reads off the winners, the Toastmaster will announce that speakers were disqualified for time, but do not name the speaker. One item that was not in the official contest rules, but that I know we used to have as a rule within the district, and I think it's worth considering, and I would recommend it because I think it's a fairly good one. You should never announce on so many speakers that there is only one person who's not announced. What I mean by that, if you have 4 speakers, you should only list 1st and 2nd, because if you're announcing 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, that means you're also announcing who's the loser, who's in last. And we would prefer to avoid that situation. Now, with most of our contests, we have more than 4 speeches, at least the ones I've been fortunate to attend, so that rarely comes up. But it's something to be aware of and to consider. I will say that I've had a chance to compete in a lot of contests. Some of them are still sanctioned. I have copies of the contest ballots for some unsanctioned contests, and Toastmasters seems to have done a very good job to make sure that those can't be held anymore. I list these here in case you ever find an opportunity, maybe not at an area or a division or a district contest, but if you want to do something special completely off to the side for your club, there are other contests that we've had in the past, which are a lot of fun to have. But the way, let's see, Toastmasters actually says, these are the ones that are sanctioned. Those are the official ones that are supported. No other contest type, showcases, etc., can be conducted by districts, including areas and divisions. That's pretty black and white, in my opinion. I think that really puts a a strong limit on, you cannot, as an area, district, or division, host one of these fun contests. Doesn't say that the clubs can't, or that some clubs can't get together without the area running it, because I, as an area governor, used to have events for the clubs in our area, promoting some cross club events just for fun and to promote something for Toastmasters to do. Anyway, though, there are contests that have been banned as sanctioned. They're now unsanctioned. We don't get to do them in our division area and district contests. But I wanted you to know that I have copies of the ballots for all of these contests. And I can say these are fun contests to do. Q&A time. I've talked a lot. Says you're talking, Barton. I can't hear you.
One thing I was wondering is that what would you say is the biggest difference in terms of judging a virtual contest versus judging a live contest, an in-person contest?
That's interesting. I haven't judged a virtual contest yet. The thing that, as a contestant, that I especially am aware of is that I look at the point structure, and some of the things that are emphasized don't work as well on virtually. So I spend a lot of time considering, for an international speech contest, where I want to move, when do I want to move, how do I want to move, so what pace. And I think I put a lot of thought into getting more points out of some of these lower areas on the ballot that might get overlooked otherwise, one of which is movement. And in a virtual contest, you're pretty much very limited because you've got the camera there. So how do you overcome that? And I don't have a good answer for that. The other thing that I've noticed is that a camera blows up your face. And if everybody's looking at a monitor, all of a sudden your face and your gestures are huge. And what would otherwise be a very subtle facial expression, suddenly when your face feels this monitor, and maybe someone has a 40-inch monitor they're watching on, it's not subtle anymore. So I feel that as a contestant, that alters how I want to do that effectively. I don't have maybe the best answer for that yet. Let me turn that around. Which of you have judged virtual contests? What have you found to be more challenging?
I would say
Go
that,
ahead, Bruce.
thank you. I would say it's hard to, when you're a contestant, it's hard to have eye contact. And
yeah,
in one of the contests I was in, everybody's screen had to be turned off. So all you're looking at is nothing.
Wait, you mean the
So you
judges?
get no feedback. All the screens everybody's video is turned off except the timer, except the primary timer in the contests that I've been in.
Oh,
So as a contestant, I mean, that makes it difficult because you get no feedback. And as a judge, when you're on virtual, it's hard to make eye contact when there's nobody there.
although I would think that they'd let everyone in the room, because I'm thinking, does it make sense that judges, if you only have the judges video on, that's wrong, because judges are anonymous by definition.
Correct.
So I can't have it set up where all the judges have their cameras on and no one else. But what happens if everybody's camera is on? That seems like, so I'm not sure what the rationale for turning everybody's screen off would
Well,
be.
I could answer that if you'd like, Chuck, in
Yes,
terms of,
please.
they're trying to level the playing field for everyone. And as you can imagine, if you're able to see someone's face and see them so close up, they also can see the audience, and it's very easy to get distracted by something. And so they want to take away the distractions. Although when you're in a live contest, the same thing could happen. But
Yeah.
on Zoom, they essentially, what the rules are is that only the speaker can be seen, and generally you shouldn't, only the speaker should pin the timer. Even the audience and the judges should not see the timer. You should not see the green, the yellow, and the red. That also would be a distraction. So you really should only see the speaker themselves, and whether you're a judge or a member of the audience. And then the timer would be pinned by the speaker, so the speaker can see him, but no one else sees the timer.
Interesting. Okay.
And now,
Thank you.
was he saying, Bruce, were you saying that you couldn't see the speaker either?
No.
No, I was saying as speaker, you're looking at a basically a blank screen except for the timer.
Yes, it's like being on television. You know, if you're an entertainer on television, you are speaking to the camera.
Right.
So you could have no audience. Like I believe like newscasters and other people, they have no audience. They're just talking to the camera, but they're trying to connect to the audience. So they're always
reading
looking at the camera.
teleprompter lots of times.
So we've got some other hands raised here. So let's see whose hands are raised. So let's see, I've just got a guest, a judge. If
Okay.
you would like to share.
Hey, Bart, that's me, Amy.
Oh,
Oh,
So I have judged virtually, and I just remembered my name was there, and I just changed it because I'm getting ready to be a judge at a contest this weekend. And the last time I was a judge, my name was there, and I came on, but I was dark because we were told to keep our screen blank when we're the judge. And so I'm changing it now so that when I do go into the contest this weekend, I'll already be changed, so that I can just change my number. It'll be black. But otherwise, I didn't. I came on and then I changed my name, and everybody knew who I was when I was the judge, one of the judges. So it's something I have to try to remember to change it to judge, if that makes sense.
so you have to work harder to remain anonymous. You have to take some extra steps.
Yes, we don't have the green or the yellow folder anymore to turn in when, the people come and collect the ballots and such. That's when they figure out in person who you are. Who are these people collecting from?
it's a little bit trickier when we're doing these virtual contests. Brian, you had a question or comment, and then we'll get Reed. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I have a question. Thanks for doing this, Chuck. I was a little confused about the originality complaint process still, especially the part where you say that the contestant has to defend themselves. Like you gave the example of you recognized the speech, you thought it wasn't original, but you didn't even know from where.
Yeah.
How can a contestant even respond to a claim like that? I don't understand what the response is like.
I can imagine a couple ways that the contestant might try to fight that. One is that a speech can be 25% copied or referenced. You can have references to someone else's, other people's speeches. You can include, I think it's up to 25% that is not original. So as a speaker, I'm going to assume that the speaker knows that it was not original, but he wants to defend himself. So he might try to say, no, I only 25% of it. The rest I came up with. But I was listening to it going, I've heard this, I know it, maybe I've read it, but it was not original. So that's one thing that the speaker might try to say is that, no, it didn't pass the threshold. Or he may just try to deny the whole thing. Say, no, it can't be because I wrote it in the car and I got this idea of talking to my wife. She triggered this thought and this joke came from what, and try to defend it this way. I don't expect a speaker to say, oh, you're right, you caught me. I took it from somebody else.
And Chuck, you might take into consideration too that all the judges have to agree. It can't be just one judge challenging it and then disqualifying the speaker. You have to sell it to all the judges, whatever. So if
The
that
way I
judge,
read it was that the
Mhm.
judges are going to vote on it. So if you've
Mm-hmm.
got 5 judges, if 3 of them agree that, no, it's doesn't sound original, or I agree that you've heard it before, and 2 of them say, no, I believe him that he wrote it himself, that 3/2 would disqualify him. It didn't say it had to be unanimous.
And the other way around as well. If 3 people said, no, I don't think it was quite 25%. I think it was under 25%, then it goes in the favor of how the judges see it. I will say, Brian, that I've been in a contest where they successfully did challenge somebody who used Mother Goose stories as part of his speech, and it clearly seemed like much more than 25%. And eventually, even though the speaker tried to challenge it, everybody knew those stories. And it said, it's not word for word, but you're using someone else's stories.
Well,
to tell
how
your
did the
story.
chief judge handle that? Did the chief judge then ask all the judges to come to the back of the room?
Oh yes, you all have to gather and listen to. Okay, so what's your argument?
Yeah.
And then the speaker gets to come and have their say, and then essentially the judges then judge or vote on who they believe. And you
When I
can
do,
disqualify.
when I raised the objection with Aileen, it was back maybe the double O's, maybe the 90, probably the double O's. And this process, I don't think was so well formed back then, because she didn't come to the rest of the judges, and perhaps she waited to see how the person scored, and maybe he wasn't in the top 3, so she didn't have to deal with it. I don't know, but she didn't go through the process that I described.
So they've fine-tuned it, but I would say another big one that comes up is if you quote somebody and you don't give credit, and that is a big no-no, and people have been cut for that. So, and that's a little easier to prove. So
Yeah.
thank you, Brian. And I know Reed had a question or comment. Did you want to go ahead and say that?
Yes, please. I have about 5 different ones, but 2 of them are actually the contest chair with announcements. Another one is about dual area
Okay.
meetings, but the one that's key you addressed. And of course, Brian had a question about it. I have been a judge and a chief judge in person. And when COVID hit, I had to pivot and go to virtual and work within the rules. The first thing, if anybody says protest, that's anybody, a judge or a contestant or the chair, we come to caucus and determine if it's a valid protest or not, first of all. Because if it's different opinions about 10%, 25%, they made reference at the end, but not when they gave the quote. We have to explain it among each other and actually be able to support, should we go forward as a protest and get the contestant in here? Or are we saying it's not a protest as we've come to an agreement?
Okay.
And as the chief judge, I don't vote. I don't break votes. It comes down to they decide and then we go with it. And if we break the caucus and there is no protest, there is no contestant called, they need never know.
Yeah, right.
Because it's not something they have to defend.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't have to be called out or brought out and have to go through that, especially if they're competing in the future. The other side of that is that it has to be clearly communicated that there may have been a timing disqualification. There may have been a content, or we might suddenly find the person isn't a paid member, as we might between a division and the district. If somebody doesn't pay their dues, all of a sudden, oops. So the judge's part on eligibility, content, timing, we have to have that coordination between timers, chief judge, tiebreaker, chief judge, ballot counters, doing it more than once. Because if you come up with a 21 and the next time you come up with 18 for a person, you're under a little bit of stress and pressure for time, but it is something that is done. And in final, with our virtual meetings, don't have just one breakout room, please. Because if you're got the 2 ballot counters and the chief judge and you see the word protest, ballot counters don't get to hang around.
Oh, yeah.
leave them in the room and call the judges to call it
Separate.
something else than the counting room. And you go there to caucus and determine if you're going to go forward with bringing a contestant in. Again, the ballot counter's not there, but they can continue on the ballot counting for a timeliness of the program,
Yeah.
because the chief judge will come back in there and go over the results, fill out the forms, and it goes good. All of your coverage and recommendations about how to judge so that we can be confident in who we're ranking 1, 2, 3. But you're absolutely correct. If someone does not sign and print their name and it's sent, it doesn't comply with the
It's
rule.
sad.
And it's a matter of rules and TI policy. And it's been very well captioned into this particular book. Thank you for the time, Mark, Chuck.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Yes, I
Yes.
posted a question on the chat. How do you judge the background, the props, or even using the space in the virtual setting?
I'm trying to think which category that would be part of, and I would think of that as, I don't have the ballot right in front of me. It seems that that's going to be part of physical, because physical is, if there's costuming, props may also be, I might consider those with effectiveness, because if the prop, well, okay, I tend to nowadays use slides in all my presentations. So even when I've done international speech contests, I had slides. So it's up to the judge to be considering, did it add to the effectiveness of this presentation? So for effectiveness, I think that's going to be something, when I speak, that it helps add to my effectiveness. And I think that's where a judge probably has the best place to include, to look at slides. And are the slides well done? Are they poorly done? Are they appropriate for the content? And then if you're doing props, how well were they utilized? Now again, I think it's going to be effectiveness, because I can have really good props, but maybe I'm clumsy with them, or the way I've introduced them, I have to come over and turn around and pick them up. I may, as a judge, feel that even though the prop was appropriate and such, that it ruined the flow, and I'm going to take them down a few points because I thought, it's great that you use the props, but you didn't use them well, perhaps, or there's some aspect to it that made it less effective than it should have been. What do you think? What other areas are there? That's the one that when I'm planning as a speaker, I'm thinking about the props and the slides as, and maybe even what I wear. Well, where I want to look good, that's part of effectiveness. That's also, there's one specifically for where I consider dress as a judge. Let's see, let me go back. I'll find it. Let's see. Physical, here's appearance. So this is going to be also where how they dressed. Did I feel that, and if someone's giving a very serious topic and they're dressed all casually, I feel that's less appropriate than someone who is dressed with the authority that I expect someone to have. If they're trying to be persuasive on a important topic, as a judge, I will rank up someone who I feel has dressed with authority, as opposed to someone who comes in looking like a slob.
And Chuck, that's a bit more subjective,
It is.
obviously, but that's the whole point, is that judges they're not supposed to bring in too much of their own personal, but obviously your opinion on how someone should dress, what is most appropriate, things like that. is certainly important. And I think Mike Carr, who won 2 years ago for international speech, and he's here in our district as well, has given several speeches on what he had done to win. And he
Okay.
thought for sure he was not going to win in the finals. He thought he knew who was going to win. So he decided that when he did his speech, he was going to go way off and just get crazy. And so he played with the space. He'd come up close to the camera. He'd go forward and back. He was all over the place. And using this space, this virtual space, in a way that got a lot of attention and heightened the communication of his speech. And for that reason, even though he said, I decided to take a big risk because I'm not going to win anyways, and he won. And it really had to do with how he used this virtual space in a very unique way that most people never think about doing. Like looking people in the eye, doing all sorts of crazy things that you couldn't do in a live speech, or in a in-person speech. But on camera, you could play with it in different ways, and it helped him, over the hump where he got that. He thinks that was one of the things that made the difference.
Very cool. So I think it's going to be, I think a lot of those things are going to fall into two categories. The one is the appearance, and the other, it has an effect on effectiveness. It has an influence on effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where those two, the physical and the way things look, will show up if I'm judging.
Thank you.
And we've got time for one more question. If someone has a question or comment, just checking real quick. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
I have another question.
Yes, Brian.
And I'll put it in the chat now as well. On the humor ballot, there's one other category that's different from the international speech. It's this audience response. And it is, I'm wondering how that can be judged, especially in the virtual meetings when everyone's cameras are off. Are you just judging your own laughter? Is that because it's worth 15 points, so it's not insignificant?
Yeah. I haven't had to face that yet, so I don't have an answer for that. That's a worthy question. I'll let someone else answer while I think about what I want to say.
Does anyone know anything about that? Because I was unaware of that. And when you're the only person people can see and you don't get an audience response. They've got the sound off, they've got their videos off, so you have no idea what their response is in a humorous speech. Although when it's live, I get it. If you're in person, you get the audience to laugh and you get the reactions. But when you're on Zoom, if they're following the same rules where we only see you and our visuals and our sound is off, there's no way to judge audience response.
No,
So that's an interesting point. Yes.
But you as the judge, you are the audience.
Ah, okay.
And that's the only thing I can fall back on there.
I don't think there's going to be anything else, and that's unfortunate. I'm thinking of the best humorous speech I did. I had a line in there that got 20 seconds of laughter, and it was one of those that as it slows down, other people would start laughing, and it kept itself going. And doing it virtually, I wouldn't have waited for it because it wouldn't have been there.
It is so hard to do humor in that environment where if you don't get and the audience does have to turn their volume up, because if someone starts to laugh, suddenly they show up in the window, and you couldn't do that in a contest. So we've had that problem in our clubs. Yeah.
Do you think contestants should pause much during their speech for laughing? Is that something they should be judged on if no one can hear anybody laugh?
Well, and I guess in this case, it really has to be up to the judge determining, did I laugh? Was I attentive?
Right.
Also, as a speaker, gauging or guessing in advance, where do I think I should pause and give people a chance to laugh by themselves? But you get a lot less laughter. Think about going to a comedy with a group as opposed to watching it by yourself. When you're by yourself, you don't laugh as much.
Right.
Those are difficult questions to ponder. When I did humorous speeches in college, because usually or I guess high school, yeah, college, usually you're doing it to two other people in the room, the judge and maybe one other speaker, because other people are coming and going. And the first time I did humorous, no one laughed. And then I got to the finals and there was a big audience and they're laughing a lot. And one of my teammates told me, you looked really surprised with all the laughter. And I thought about that later. And I thought, yeah, because I hadn't encountered in any of the preliminary rounds anyone laughing. So it caught me by surprise and I didn't handle it as well as I should have.
Maybe the speaker should have one of those little buttons where you can push for the laughter, like they do on TV. And so that might help in the situation. But it is true, without a cue to laugh, when you have a bigger audience, if someone laughs, then other people are cued into it, and it can really build on itself. And that's why TV, has had these laugh tracks in the past.
I was just thinking the same thing as a humorous speaker. Maybe I want to add a laugh track.
Very true. Well, great
Hmm.
points all. And I realize we're just a little bit over time. So I think at this point, I just want to say thank you all for your participation, your great questions. Thank you, Chuck Hinkle, for a wonderful presentation again. I think this will help many, many people as they're building their skills as a judge. And I encourage people, if you qualify for it as a judge, start judging these contests. Not only do we need people to help out, but we need newer people to learn these skills and hone these skills, and it will help you improve your abilities to assess yourself and evaluate others in your clubs. So it sharpens your skills overall, as well as helps out the clubs who are trying to have their competitions. So I want to thank you again, and if you would go to tmd55.org to find out more about our continuing education programs. I plan to have a lot of different programs going on in the next month or two as we approach the conference and people test drive their presentations. So there are going to be some great things. So if you can't go to the conference, although I do recommend it, you can see some of these either early on or maybe even later. So you won't necessarily miss it. You just won't get it in a timely way. So thank you again, Chuck. Thank you everybody for being here. And on behalf of Toastmasters District 55's continuing education program, again, I'm really thrilled to have you all here. Have a good night.
Good night, guys.